This text set has Indian Education by Sherman Alexie as the anchor source. This short story, written by a Native American writer, is going to be analyzed since an intertextual perspective with 4 other sources. 2 poems, Threads of Old Memory by Jeanette Armstrong and The Devil's Language by Marilyn Dumont, 1 book of short stories, The Dance Boots by Linda Legard, and another short story, Boating in Little Earth by Louise Erdrich.
The previous texts are a product of Native American writers that are set in a postcolonialist way of writing in English language. Although their focus is apparently diverse, they all happen to share a lamentation feature that is also used as an attempt to reach social empowerment through the literature.
In Indian education, Sherman Alexie makes several reflections about how the historical oppression towards indigenous people has plunged the reservations into socioeconomic precarious conditions such as poorness and low quality education. Throughout the whole text, he also exposes different struggles regarding to topics unique to Native American populations as ethnicity, identity, colonial relationships, and power structures. One of these examples is the phrase Indians lose against. This is an analogy of the historical role of losers that indigenous have played in the colonization history.
Marilyn Dumont and Jeanette Armstrong are both Canadian Native American writers and poets. In Dumont's poem The Devil Language, she addresses different problematics that are visible in Indian education as well. For instance, stereotypes, discrimination, and linguistic lamentation. Some examples are, quote, "You're a dumb Indian, dumb, drunk, or violent." One wrong sound and you're shelved in a native literature section. The great white way could silence us all. Quote. This poem finishes with a melancholy image of Native Americans' way of life, which has been dominated and forgotten, so that the only remains are small syllables and large clearings of echoed voices. In Armstrong's poem, she illustrates the fear and the agony that Native American writers go through when they write about their people. In her poem, she illustrates some historical characteristics that evidence the agonizing death of Native American languages. Both poems convey a strong message to the reader about colonization and its bad consequences. Also, lamentation is a theme that is discussed in both poems, as in the anchor source.
In the book The Dance Boots, Linda Legard portrays the life of a family from the Ojibwe community and their struggle while following their traditional ways of life in the face of a post-colonial world. Legard has a sense of history that is notable within these stories, especially in the description of the stories of the older Ojibwe, who were forced to not to use their native language and to break their indigenous culture in government-run boarding schools, where they were obligated to learn more civilized ways of living. In addition, Legard links these tales of the past with the stories of the younger generations, who feel obligated to carry on their traditions at the same time they progress in the modern world. In Voting in Little Earth, Louis Erdrich describes the behavior of Native American voters, which seems to be very excited of being taken into account in the elections. This situation can be interpreted as a feeling of inclusion within Native Americans, which have been marginalized during decades in the USA. Erdrich also depicts the historical and social lamentation when the main character of his story, which is also a Native American woman, says that they are descendants of the original inhabitants of that country that later became immigrants. This quote shows a clear relation with colonialism and loss of identity and territory, which is also an analyzed feature in the other sources.
The previous narratives somehow exhibit historical features that Native American populations have had to go through as a consequence of colonialism and the legacy that this process has left into their lives. They expose how historically they have had to face its negative sequels and have been forced to live within imposed realities in which they, as the colonized one, have been the losers, those oppressed by the large winner white world, the colonizers. But their denounce is not just made from a historical position, rather is set from a current perspective in which they see themselves as still colonized, invaded, and not free. In this respect, they criticize the impositions of the white dominant society that had systemed their Native American voices and buried their identity. And through lamentation in literature, they find an alternative to express their own voice, their own values, traditions, concerns, needs, and therefore an alternative to survive and liberate themselves. The authors already mentioned express in their writing a deep sense of loss at different levels, but they all have to do with colonialist aftermath. In Indian education, there is a current sense of lamentations about historical and social loss. In both poems, The Devil's Language and Threads of the Old Memory, there is a linguistic lamentation about indigenous languages lost. And finally, on the short stories cases, there is a depiction of cultural loss.
Another feature that they all seem to share is that within their stories, they also denounce the improper consideration of Native American people, calling them savages, uncivilized, violent, and ignorant. They are aware of the social hierarchies they live in which they have been doomed and relegated, while those on top, those with power, have been in charge of creating and perpetuating such stereotypes through their discourses. In this sense, Native American writers acknowledge the dependency bound between discourse and power, the determinant influence of power in the construction of historical knowledge and in the reproduction of stereotypes. Moreover, they see themselves stuck in a crossroad, and the only way of liberating themselves is by challenging the power relationships and reversing narratives. And that reversion is achieved by literature. Their writing raises as an attempt to reproduce the new discourses in which they can transmit their lamentation and also show who they truly are beyond popular consciousness. Hence, through their works, they are able to empower and liberate themselves by means of their own voice in which they could depict their real identity.
One would think that, as in their document, they lament about the multiple linguistic, cultural, historical, and sociocultural losses that as Native American communities have had throughout their whole history, they will reject every legacy that colonization process have brought into their lives. Clearly, this will include English language as it has been the device that per excellence has been used by colonizers as their mechanism of oppression and acculturation. Nonetheless, Native American writers do not reject English. Indeed, they appropriate it as their own power mechanism. They take the colonizer language and use it on their favor. In conclusion, throughout English language, they address their own silenced voices. They transform discourses and narratives, vindicate their communities, resist oppression, and rescue their identities.